Samantha was knee-deep in all the little details that go into planning a surprise. She wanted everything to be perfect for Ben's birthday, so she spent the afternoon running around their apartment in Brooklyn, hiding balloons, baking Ben's favorite chocolate cake, and messaging their friends to make sure everyone knew what time to show up. She smiled to herself, thinking about how much Ben would love the photo collage she had made. It had taken her weeks to collect all the old pictures and write down tiny notes for each memory. Everything seemed to be falling into place. And even though she was exhausted, she was happy. She believed tonight would be a night to remember. As the evening crept closer, Samantha reached for her phone to double-check her messages. A quick notification from Ben's best friend, Tony, popped up, confirming that he would bring the party hats. Smiling, Samantha responded quickly, then slipped her phone onto the kitchen counter, distracted by the cake timer beeping insistently. She never could have guessed that this harmless exchange was about to flip her whole world upside down. When Ben came home, he immediately noticed the phone lighting up on the counter. He glanced at the screen, seeing Tony's name pop up again with another message. His mind raced with doubts, insecurities he never admitted bubbling to the surface. Something about the way Samantha had been secretive lately, disappearing into the bedroom making phone calls, had bothered him. Now, seeing the messages, jealousy took over. Without even giving Samantha a chance to explain, Ben demanded answers, his voice sharp and far louder than usual. Words tumbled out of him, heavy. With suspicion, he accused her of lying, of sneaking around, of betraying his trust. Samantha's face fell. She tried to laugh it off at first, but Ben was serious. Her explanations about Tony and the party plans only seemed to make things worse. The more she said, the less Ben believed her. Tears stung her eyes as she pleaded with him to just listen. The conversation grew louder, echoing off the apartment walls, until the front door creaked open and Ben's mother, Mrs. Green, stepped inside with a frown. She had a history of siding with her son, and today was no different. She shook her head and sighed, casting judgmental glances at Samantha. Suddenly, Samantha felt completely alone, surrounded by family in her own home, but with no one willing to hear her side. The voices grew, and the weight of the moment pressed down on her more than she thought possible. Feeling crushed, Samantha could hardly believe how fast things had unraveled. It was not only Ben's angry words that stung, but also the way Mrs. Green stared her down, making it painfully clear whose side she was on. There was no comfort to be found, nowhere to turn, not even a gentle word as Ben, caught between his mother's firm opinion and his own jealous fears, told her she needed to leave. He did not yell, but his tone left no room for argument. The message was stark. The trust they once shared was gone, replaced with suspicion and hurt. Samantha gathered what little strength she had left and packed a suitcase in silence. Her hands shook as she stuffed her favorite jeans and t-shirts into the bag, feeling like even her own clothes did not belong anymore. Photos from happier times stared at her from the living room shelves, but she could not bear to look at them now. She paused at the door, keys in one hand and her heavy bag in the other, but neither Ben nor Mrs. Green made a move to stop her. The harsh snap of the door behind her sounded like something breaking that could never be put together again. Inside the elevator, Samantha could barely keep from falling apart. She stared at the faded numbers above the doors as the car slid down floor after floor, each ding reminding her of everything she was leaving behind. She tried to hold back tears, but they rolled down her face anyway. She thought about how thin trust had become in her marriage. If Ben and his mother could believe she was capable of betrayal so quickly, then maybe there had never been trust at all, not the deep kind where you know, without question, that you matter. Somewhere during that slow descent, a different feeling quietly settled beside the heartbreak. Samantha realized she was done begging anyone to believe her. If there was no trust left, she would not fight for a space that did not want her. She fingered her apartment keys, thinking how strange it was that this chapter had closed without warning and with almost no kindness. What she could not have guessed in that messy moment of loss was that she was at the very start of something new. Even with her heart broken, a seed of change began to grow quietly inside her, ready to shape her path in ways she never would have expected. Samantha stood on the curb outside her old apartment, feeling the weight of her suitcase pull at her arm. She took out her phone and called her best friend, Lisa, the only person she could think of right now. Lisa lived in Manhattan, in a little apartment above a noisy pizzeria. The moment Lisa picked up and heard Samantha's shaky voice, she insisted that Samantha come over right that second. Without a second thought, Samantha caught the next subway downtown, her mind racing the entire way. When Samantha finally reached Lisa's apartment, Lisa pulled her into a warm hug, somehow managing to squeeze away some of the sadness that had wrapped itself so tightly around her. The apartment smelled like garlic and basil from the restaurant below, and the familiar mess of mismatched pillows, open books and old coffee mugs made Samantha feel just a bit more human. As soon as Samantha dropped her bag and found a safe spot on Lisa's old couch, the tears started. She tried to talk, but all that came out at first were sobs and bits of broken sentences. Lisa sat with her, patient and calm, bringing a cup of tea and stroking her hair. Bit by bit, Samantha managed to tell her everything that had happened: Ben's cold accusations, Mrs. Green's hard stare, the way the apartment no longer felt like home. She spilled out her heartbreak, not holding anything back. After a while, she fell silent, staring at her hands, scared to say the next thing out loud. Taking a deep breath, Samantha finally admitted the secret she had kept to herself for a whole week. She was pregnant. The word seemed to hang in the air, bigger than anything else she had said. Lisa's eyes widened, and she quickly wrapped her arms around Samantha again, whispering comfort, and telling her she was not alone, not for a single second. Lisa said she should go back and tell Ben the truth. She insisted that Ben deserved to know about the baby, and maybe that news would change everything, but Samantha was not so sure. The pain from Ben's lack of trust felt too deep, and every time she pictured walking back into that apartment, her chest tightened. She shook her head, saying she needed time for herself and for the baby growing inside her. Taking a step back seemed like the only way to break the cycle of doubt. Samantha knew, deep down, she could not build a life around someone who would not believe in her. At least, not now. In the days that followed, Samantha did everything she could to keep her mind from wandering back to Ben. Every morning her phone buzzed with missed calls and messages, each one from Ben or sometimes even Mrs. Green, but Samantha forced herself not to answer. She let Lisa shield her from the noise, filling her days with walks around Manhattan, visits to small bakeries, and the occasional lazy movie night. Even surrounded by all the busyness of the city and a friend who really cared, a quiet ache still lingered somewhere deep in her chest. Samantha knew she had to protect not only herself, but the tiny life growing inside her. She told herself over and over that rushing back or letting old wounds lead her choices would only restart the same cycle of hurt. She felt an unfamiliar kind of strength take root the longer she stayed away from Ben, as if with each ignored message she reclaimed a little more of her true self. Lisa offered gentle encouragement, reminding her that healing was not about shutting out the world, but about being honest with herself and letting the right kind of change in. Then, out of nowhere, an email from Mrs. Abbott, one of her old college professors, landed in Samantha's inbox. At first, Samantha hesitated to open it, worried it would just be another reminder of everything she was leaving behind. But it turned out to be something completely different. Mrs. Abbott wrote to say that she remembered Samantha's hard work, in design classes and wanted to let her know about a job opening at a growing company in Chicago called North Loop Creative. The role was tailor-made for Samantha's skills, designing branding for small businesses, something she had always dreamed about but never quite chased. Lisa squealed with excitement when Samantha told her, calling it fate. To Samantha, it sounded like hope, a real fresh start, far from the streets and memories of Brooklyn, where she could work, raise her baby, and rebuild without Ben's doubts hovering over every decision. It was scary, sure, and part of her wondered how she would manage all by herself in a new city. But she could not help thinking this chance might be the sign she needed. A new chapter could begin in Chicago, and with that thought, Samantha felt her heart beat a little lighter. Arriving in Chicago felt like starting over in every way possible. The city was busy and unfamiliar, with wide streets and chilly wind that seemed to push Samantha along whether she was ready or not. Her first weeks were filled with distractions, hunting for a tiny apartment she could afford on her own, picking out the basics at the nearest Target, and getting lost more than once on the L train. Most nights, she would flop onto her futon and stare at the ceiling, her mind racing with worries about the future and what she was about to face by herself. North Loop Creative was a welcoming place, but the work came at her fast. There were new systems to learn, deadlines she had to stick to, and meetings where she quietly tried to prove herself to her boss and teammates. Samantha was drained by the end of each day, her feet swollen and her back aching from sitting at her tiny desk. She kept her pregnancy a secret, mostly out of fear. She worried that people at work would see her differently or wonder if she could keep up. With no family nearby and only the occasional cheerful video call from Lisa to look forward to, it was easy for loneliness to sneak in. She managed the early symptoms as best she could, hiding her tiredness with extra concealer or sneaking crackers at her desk to ward off nausea. She was determined not to let anyone see her struggle, but the weight of her secret made every day feel a little heavier. Samantha repeated to herself that she just needed to get through the coming weeks, that she would find her footing in time. Then, one grey Thursday afternoon, she went to a routine doctor's visit tucked between work meetings. The nurse chatted away as she set up the ultrasound, but when she paused, a deep frown crossed her face before she turned the monitor so Samantha could see. There, clear as day, were not one or two but 3 tiny heartbeats. "Congratulations, you are having triplets," the nurse said, her smile wide, but Samantha's head started spinning. Panic shot through her. How could she raise 3 babies? On her own, in a city she barely knew. Rent, daycare, doctor's appointments, it all felt impossible now. She left the clinic with her mind crowded by fear, wondering how she could possibly give 3 children what they needed, when she was still struggling just to stand on her own 2 feet. As Samantha pushed herself to face each difficult day in Chicago, Ben remained in Brooklyn, weighed down by regrets that never seemed to lift. After the shouting match that ended their marriage, Ben had expected his anger to give way to relief or maybe to a fresh start. Instead, he found himself haunted by his choices, especially after going over old messages and realizing that Samantha's conversations with Tony were exactly what she had said they were, innocent details about his forgotten birthday party. The truth landed on Ben with crushing force. He had been wrong. He had listened to his jealous streak instead of the woman he loved. Unable to sleep, Ben spent his nights replaying everything that had happened, his guilt growing heavier each time he remembered the look in Samantha's eyes as she left. He called her over and over, but every time he tried to reach her, he was sent straight to voicemail. He left long messages apologizing, but Samantha never responded. Even Mrs. Green, usually quick with strong opinions, seemed subdued now, offering nothing but awkward silences when Ben brought up Samantha's name. He tried every way he could think of to find her. Friends, neighbors, even Tony, they all had the same answer. They had not heard from Samantha since she had left. Each attempt to reconnect only ended with a closed door or a polite text saying she was not ready to talk. With each rejection, Ben felt a growing ache, knowing he had no one but himself to blame for their broken trust. As weeks passed, Ben's desperation only deepened. He missed Samantha in ways he had never expected, wishing more than anything that he could undo what had been done. When he heard that Samantha might have moved out of the city, he did the only thing he thought he had left. He spent money he could barely spare on a private detective. The man promised results, but turned up nothing more than a change of address and an empty forwarding mailbox somewhere in Chicago. Unknown to Ben, Mrs. Green, hurt by the fallout and wanting to shield her son from more disappointment, quietly discouraged any well-meaning friends from helping. The months blurred into each other, with Ben stuck in a cycle of hope and loss. Despite all his efforts, it was as if the city itself wanted to keep him from ever finding Samantha again, shutting down the last remaining threads that might have connected them. The hope for reconciliation slipped further away, lost beneath the noise of two busy cities and the choices neither of them could undo. Mrs. Green watched Ben drift through their Brooklyn apartment, hardly eating and barely talking. She had never seen her son so lost. It struck her that after everything, Samantha's absence had left a bigger hole than even she could have predicted. The late-night phone calls, the endless waiting for news, and the little signs of hope that Ben still clung to all made Mrs. Green realize that if something did not change, Ben might never move on. She told herself she was acting out of love, wanting the best for her son. But somewhere deeper inside, she knew it was harder for her to watch him suffer day after day, as if he expected Samantha to come walking through the door at any moment. One afternoon, after a quiet conversation with the private detective she had hired to track Samantha, Mrs. Green decided to take matters into her own hands. She quietly handed the detective an envelope with a thick stack of bills and clear instructions to relay a carefully crafted story to Ben. The story was that Samantha had left the country and was living abroad with another man, starting over as if their years together meant nothing. She made the detective promise to keep up the lie no matter how many times Ben called or how hard he pressed for details. Mrs. Green knew her actions would hurt Ben, but she believed at least it was a clean break, better than dragging out the pain with uncertainty and hope. When Ben finally received the message, he could not process the shock at first. The idea of Samantha starting a new life somewhere across the ocean with someone else knocked the wind out of him. There were no final words, no chance to say goodbye, no opportunity to fix his mistakes, just a permanent goodbye through a story he was forced to accept. He threw himself into work, picking up every extra shift at the architecture firm and pushing aside anyone who tried to bring up his personal life. The spark that once made him passionate about his designs faded away. He barely spoke to old friends and kept his phone on silent to avoid reminders of what he had lost. Days turned to weeks, and the narrative Mrs. Green set in motion did its job. Ben grew colder and more closed off, frustration and regret shadowing everything he did. Without anything to anchor him, he felt more lost than ever, making choices on autopilot and letting the emptiness take over. The past with Samantha broke. Down into memories he started to doubt, and the gap between who he was before and the person he had become seemed to get wider each day. Just when life in Chicago seemed almost too much for Samantha to bear, something unexpected happened. One afternoon at North Loop Creative, Samantha was working late on a branding project for a small bakery when an older woman paused by her desk. Her name was Elaine Carter, one of the company's partners, a woman everyone admired but rarely saw on the office floor. Elaine had a reputation for running successful businesses all over the Midwest and for being sharp, no nonsense, but fair. Elaine glanced over Samantha's shoulder and asked a few questions about the design she was creating. Instead of just nodding politely, Samantha explained her choices, her ideas tumbling out in an honest, nervous rush. Instead of being put off, Elaine looked genuinely interested. She stood there longer than Samantha expected, asking about her background and what drew her to creative work. Something about the conversation felt different. Elaine listened with real attention, nodding as if she understood what it was like to be tackling more than one huge challenge at once. Over the weeks, Elaine made a habit of stopping by Samantha's desk, offering advice or just checking in. She seemed to sense when Samantha felt overwhelmed and would pull her aside for coffee or just some quiet time. Elaine even shared a few stories from her own early days, years before she became successful, when she too had felt alone and unsure in a fast-moving city. The honesty in those moments built a unique trust between them. Before long, Samantha found herself opening up about her own struggles, not just the stress at work, but the wild curveball of discovering she was expecting triplets and the constant anxiety about how she would ever handle it all on her own. Elaine never tried to shrug off Samantha's worries. Instead, she listened, shared practical tips, and sometimes just offered a hug when words were not enough. More than once, Elaine told her she saw a spark in Samantha, a kind of brave energy people could not fake. "You are tougher than you think," she would say with a little grin. That bond quickly grew into something like family. For Elaine, Samantha became the daughter she never had, someone she wanted to see succeed and be happy. For Samantha, Elaine's steadiness and support filled a gap she had not realized was so empty. When nights were long and mornings uncertain, having Elaine by her side made the hardest times feel just a little bit easier. The day the triplets arrived, Samantha's life changed forever. It was an early morning in March at Northwestern Memorial. Hospital in Chicago was still half covered in dirty snow. The labor was exhausting and intense. By the time it was over, Samantha was too tired to cry, but as soon as she saw the 3 tiny, bundled-up babies, a deep, fierce love took over. All the noise and challenges she had faced seemed to melt away, at least for a few minutes. She named them Lucas, Max, and Sophie, and every inch of her wanted to keep them safe. Reality set in quickly. Bringing 3 newborns home to her small apartment was chaos from the start. Samantha hardly slept. She nursed or rocked a baby all night, then tried to catch a nap between bottle prep and endless diaper changes. Little things like getting the stroller through the apartment doorway or finding time for a quick shower felt like Olympic-level struggles. The fear of getting something wrong, of not measuring up, was always there. Yet underneath the exhaustion, Samantha discovered a surprising strength. Every giggle or tiny grip of her finger reminded her why she kept pushing forward. Elaine never once stepped back, no matter how hard things got. She drove Samantha and the babies back from the hospital and showed up with groceries, freezer meals, and once a twin stroller she had tracked down online. On nights when Samantha was ready to break down, Elaine would hold a baby or two so Samantha could rest, or she would just sit beside her on the couch, listening and making sure Samantha knew she was not alone. With the daily whirlwind, Samantha began noticing how many other single moms or families struggled to find baby products that really fit their lives. She and Elaine started talking, and those conversations built into something bigger. They saw a gap in the market for practical, cleverly designed gear, clothing, and toys that actually made life easier, especially for parents juggling more than one child. Elaine believed in Samantha's ideas for designs, and together they decided to start a new business, Windy City Kids. They worked late into many nights, brainstorming, sketching, and learning the ins and outs of getting their company off the ground. Windy City Kids launched quietly at first, with a handful of products, but parents loved them. Orders grew every week. Suddenly, Samantha did not just have stability, she had purpose and pride. For both women, the company was more than work. It was a lifeline and a reason to look forward to tomorrow. While Samantha's world found new rhythm and meaning, Ben's days in Brooklyn fell into a pattern that felt more like slow motion unraveling. Without Samantha's honest perspective and gentle encouragement, his confidence in managing green architecture started to slip. The pressure to prove that he could keep everything under control pushed him to make decisions without really thinking things through. Ben took on risky projects with tight deadlines, overextended the company's budget, and brushed off the advice of colleagues who had always respected him. Before long, the consequences caught up. One mistake led to another. Ben approved a high-rise contract based on an unrealistic timeline, and it turned into a mess of missed schedules, lost money, and upset clients. Problems piled up so quickly that his staff seemed unsure whether to step in or step away. Office morale dropped, and even the city inspectors started showing up more than usual. Each time Ben walked through the doors of green architecture, the place felt colder and less like the dream he had once built with such care. In the middle of all this stress, Ben's relationship with his mother, Mrs. Green, became tense. With every new complication at work, Mrs. Green offered advice, but her words came out sharp and always layered with judgment. She never failed to remind Ben of what Samantha would have done differently, which only made him wince. Worse yet, Ben began to see patterns in things his mother had said and done over the years. He recognized how she had pulled strings behind the scenes, making him dependent on her approval. When he finally pieced together how she had manipulated the detective and steered the story about Samantha's new life, it felt like a punch to the gut. Now, the apartment felt smaller and tense. Meals with Mrs. Green grew silent and short. Even small talk became hard, full of suspicion and resentment. Ben found himself questioning every bit of advice she gave, no longer certain of her intentions. Realizing how much control his mother had always held over his life left him angry, not just at her, but at himself for playing along for so long. He felt betrayed on every front, still longing for Samantha, but also waking up to how little space he had been given to grow. With each new blow, the near collapse of his firm, the breakdown at home, Ben started to wonder if it was possible to pick up the pieces and finally make his own choices, no matter the cost. 5 years slipped by like pages turning in the wind, and Samantha's world had changed in ways she never planned, but now couldn't imagine living without. Windy City Kids became a national success, earning a reputation for creative ideas and real solutions for parents all over the United States. Magazine interviews, podcast, features and social media buzz all seemed to circle back to Samantha's name as an example of strength and creativity. Through all those busy, sometimes overwhelming years, Elaine stood by her side, not just as a business partner, but still very much the mother figure Samantha had treasured since their first meeting. Lucas, Max, and Sophie grew up happy and sure of their place in the world. Samantha poured her heart into their lives, making their small home a whirlwind of love. Improvised dance parties in the kitchen, bedtime stories by the window while the snow dusted down outside, and birthday parties with half the neighborhood packed into the living room. Though questions about their father sprouted up now and then, Samantha found gentle ways to answer, and the triplets went right back to building forts and chasing each other through the park, surrounded by friends and plenty of laughter. Then, one chilly morning in late autumn, everything changed with a knock at the door. That day started out just like any other, but by mid-morning, Samantha was racing to Lurie Children's Hospital, heart pounding with an old, familiar fear she thought she had outgrown. Max had collapsed at school, struggling to breathe. Doctors moved quickly, their faces serious as they ran test after test. Hours later, Samantha heard the words she never wanted to hear. Max's diagnosis was rare and urgent. He needed a transplant, something so specific that the chances of finding a perfect match were almost zero, unless a direct blood relative stepped forward. Suddenly, The world Samantha had held together with so much work and love seemed at risk of slipping through her fingers. There was no way around the medical truth. Max's best hope was his own father, someone Samantha had spent years trying not to think about, someone she had told her children little but carefully chosen bits about. Decisions she had made for safety, for healing, for moving on, all circled back to one moment, the chance that Ben could save their son's life. And with that, the past crashed into her present, leaving Samantha facing the possibility that everything she had built might depend on facing Ben one last time. As Samantha listened to the doctors explain Max's condition, waves of guilt and old sadness rushed back, nearly overwhelming her. She had worked so hard to give her kids a peaceful life, far away from the pain of the past, staying busy with work and making sure they always felt safe and loved. Now, though, the weight of all those choices pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. There was no way out. She could not hide from this. Max needed his father, and that meant Samantha had to uncover everything she had carefully put away. For days, she went back and forth in her mind, replaying the last time she had seen Ben and thinking about what telling the truth would mean for everyone she loved. Guilt gnawed at her, not just for her own sake, but for what she had kept from her children and from Ben. She wondered again if she had made the right decisions, or if she had just been running from the heartbreak of old wounds that never fully healed. Now, faced with a crisis no amount of planning could prevent, Samantha realized that protecting her family was not just about sheltering them from the past, but sometimes about opening old doors, even when it hurt. She hesitated for almost a week before reaching out for help. In the end, Samantha called Michael, her former brother-in-law, and the only person from that part of her life she still trusted. Michael had always been quietly kind to her, never taking sides, and over the years they had exchanged the occasional email, a birthday wish, holiday photos of her growing family, but never anything too personal. Samantha told him the truth with trembling hands and a breaking voice. She had 3 children, Ben was their father, and now Max's life depended on their ability to reach him. She explained everything, from what happened after she left Brooklyn, to the lie Ben's mother had told, and why she had chosen to keep her distance for so long. Michael listened without judgment, just pure concern and brotherly caring in his voice. He promised to do whatever he could to help find Ben. In the following days, as Samantha waited for news, she found herself finally sorting through the pain she had stored away, bit by bit. Each phone call with Michael helped patch together the pieces of the story, preparing her for the conversation she knew she could no longer put off. The moment she would finally have to face Ben and reveal everything. When Samantha finally got word that Ben was living back in Brooklyn and that Michael had arranged a meeting, she felt like every nerve in her body was on high alert. The city skyline came into view as she flew in with Lucas, Max, and Sophie, each child clutching her hand, eyes wide with excitement, not realizing yet the heavy reason that had brought them. And there, Elaine had secured a private helicopter to avoid the stress of a crowded airport. It was a scene almost too surreal, Samantha stepping back into her old world, but no longer alone. Arriving at the landing pad on top of a hospital near Prospect Park, Samantha took a deep breath, looking out over the city that once meant safety and love, and then so much heartbreak. The triplets, in matching blue jackets, stayed close, sensing that this was more than just a new adventure. Elaine was by her side as always, keeping things calm for the kids and offering that silent, unwavering support. When Ben walked into the hospital's quiet waiting room and saw Samantha again, his whole face changed. He looked older than she'd remembered, hair thinner, eyes tired, shoulders slumped with years of regret and stress. The sharp confidence he'd worn for so many years had faded, replaced by something gentler and sadder. He was not the same man she had left behind, and that realization hit Samantha all at once. But what truly rocked Ben was the sight of the 3 children. They stood in a small line just behind Samantha, their faces holding the same wary hope. The resemblance was impossible to deny. 3 sets of brown eyes, 3 crooked smiles, each like a tiny mirror reflecting pieces of Ben back at him. The weight of lost years suddenly became real, almost physical, and Ben's voice disappeared as he tried to take in what he was seeing. People nearby glanced over, some whispering as the surprising scene unfolded. News of their helicopter arrival had spread through the hospital, but only those present could feel the deep emotion behind the spectacle. Samantha stepped forward, holding Max's hand a little tighter, and faced Ben. In that moment, every decision, every hurt, stretched between them like an invisible thread. Ben realized instantly that all the pain and confusion he had lived with was nothing compared to the fullness of what he had missed, the family he never knew existed until now. The first few moments after the triplets met, Ben were nearly silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy, not peaceful. Ben just stared at them, still trying to process the reality. Lucas, always the boldest of the 3, finally broke the ice. "Are you our dad?" he asked, looking up with wide, searching eyes. Sophie and Max stood close, waiting for the answer, curiosity and nervousness fighting on their small faces. Ben's voice shook a little as he knelt down, looking at each child. "Yes, I am," he said softly, feeling both awe and overwhelming ache for the years he had missed. Max, holding Samantha's hand with white knuckles, asked, "Is that why we look like you?" For a second, Ben tried to smile, but the truth was too raw. He nodded, eyes glassy, unable to hide the tears any longer. The kids, innocent and straightforward, asked a million questions at once. Where had he been? Did he know their birthdays? Would he come to their next soccer game? Each question chipped away at any walls Ben still had up, their honesty and hope catching him off guard. Whatever anger Samantha felt for Ben, or for herself, faded into the background as she watched the connection begin, fragile and necessary, between her children and their father. It was in this messy, emotional moment that Mrs. Green arrived. Her presence made the tension in the room spike. She immediately noticed Samantha standing protectively beside the boys, and Elaine watching from a distance. Mrs. Green's face darkened as she took in the scene, her eyes moving from Samantha to Ben and back to the kids. Without waiting, Mrs. Green spoke sharply, asking questions about why she had not known she was a grandmother, pointing out every perceived slight. Ben's patience cracked. For the first time in his life, he spoke up against his mother, demanding answers for the lies that had kept Samantha and the triplets from him. Elaine calmly stepped in, supporting Samantha and helping keep the kids distracted for a moment. The adults' voices grew louder, breaking the calm of the hospital hallway. Lucas and Sophie watched, confusion growing, while Max squeezed Samantha's hand tighter. Unable to make sense of what they were hearing, the children stayed close, absorbing the emotional charge in the room. Even if they did not understand every word, they recognized that something important and life-changing was happening right in front of them. As the reality of Max's medical crisis settled over everyone, the tension that had filled the hospital room began to shift. Suddenly, arguments and old wounds were set aside because nothing mattered more than getting Max the help he needed. Doctors and nurses moved in and out quietly, checking on Max and comforting Samantha, but everyone's attention was on what needed to happen next. Ben looked at Max, who was hooked up to monitors and looking far too small for the big hospital bed. The weight of being a parent, something that had always seemed distant and abstract, hit Ben all at once. He did not hesitate when the doctors explained the tests required to see if he could be a match for the transplant. He nodded firmly, already rolling up his sleeve for a blood draw, willing to do anything if it gave his son a fighting chance. Samantha caught his eye and nodded, a silent show of appreciation and trust. The hours that followed were long and slow. While Max rested under the care of the medical team, the rest of the family waited in an empty room just down the hall. Triplets, confused and tired, played quietly with some donated toys in the corner, occasionally glancing up to see their parents sitting together, closer than they had been in years. It was awkward at first. Neither Samantha nor Ben knew where to start, but the need to do right by Max acted like a bridge over the years of silence between them. Bit by bit, they found themselves sharing little details about the time that had passed. Ben spoke frankly about how his business had crumbled, how he blamed himself, and how lonely the years had been. Samantha talked about building Windy City Kids from the ground up, the sleepless nights when all 3 kids had colds at once, and how she learned to be both mother and father at the same time. Painful memories surfaced, misunderstandings, sharp words, and all the moments when a phone call or letter might have changed everything. But now, sitting together, it was easier to see how life had separated them just as much as all the choices and mistakes. The conversation was not perfect, but there were a few quiet laughs and even some gentle teasing about whose stubbornness had really kept them apart. Little by little, the air between them began to clear. There was no sudden forgiveness or return to old ways, but each word and look started rebuilding trust, just enough to remind them that even after everything, family was still possible. When the news finally came that Ben was a match for Max, relief swept through the whole family like a fresh breeze after days of worry. For a moment, the fear and anxiety faded, and everyone allowed themselves to hope again. Max sat up in bed, grinning weakly at his dad, who smiled back through wet eyes. Lucas and Sophie huddled around their brother, excited and curious about what would come next. But alongside the good news, the doctors shared something unexpected, a genetic condition that Ben had never known about. They explained it carefully, a hereditary disorder that had slipped under the radar his whole life, masked by mild symptoms and overlooked as quirks or bad luck. It suddenly made sense why Ben's mother, Mrs. Green, had always been so overprotective, insisting on special diets and extra doctor visits when he was a kid. It turned out she had known more than she ever told him, keeping the real reason hidden, maybe out of fear, or maybe thinking she was protecting him by keeping things quiet. This new information shook Ben to his core. He started to put together a picture of his childhood that looked a lot different than he remembered. Every time his mother lectured him about safety, every time she quietly interfered in his choices, it was more than just stubborn parenting. It was about keeping a secret that controlled both their lives. What started as love and concern had turned over years into a kind of trap neither had noticed until it was almost too late. Because Max would need ongoing specialist care, the medical team recommended relocating for a while to Houston, where there was a top center for Max's treatment. The whole family packed up, exchanging Brooklyn's busy streets for the open Texas sky and warmer weather. It was a big adjustment, but no one hesitated, not when Max's health was on the line. In Houston, the family found themselves in new roles. Ben, usually proud and in control, struggled to ask questions and accept help, facing the same uncertainty Samantha had known for years. Samantha, for her part, managed schedules and doctor visits, growing more patient as she watched Ben try to make up for lost time. Slowly, trust started to build between them again. Not from pretending everything was fine, but from leaning on each other in small ways. The experience brought Ben and Samantha together again, just a little closer with every day. Settling into life in Houston took a lot more energy than any of them had expected. The city, so wide and different from Brooklyn, with its huge freeways and sunny sprawl, was a strange backdrop for the kind of change happening inside their family. Ben tried to fit into their new routine, but it was hard going at first. He often looked uncomfortable, not sure where to step in or when to step back. Every morning he made an effort, waking the kids for school and learning to pack their lunches, even if he got the snacks all wrong. It was his way of showing up, trying to be the dad the triplets had never known. The kids, for their part, were both curious and cautious. They watched Ben closely, testing his patience and asking blunt questions he could not always answer. Sophie, especially, wanted to know why he had not been there. Lucas pushed boundaries, checking to see if Ben's promises would actually stick. Max, dealing with more hospital visits, was sometimes quiet with his dad, but was always the first to slip his hand into Ben's when he needed comfort. Slowly, through school projects, soccer games, and nights spent worrying together about Max's health, Ben found ways to be present. He learned that every small moment, tying a shoe, hearing a joke at the dinner table, or washing dishes side by side, helped build the trust he had once lost. For Samantha, things were not simple either. Even as routines began to set in, her doubts did not fall away overnight. She tried to be civil, making space for Ben and helping him learn the pieces of parenting she knew by heart. But old hurts sometimes bubbled up, and on quiet evenings she wondered if true forgiveness was even possible, or if their family could ever really be whole. Between meetings for Windy City Kids, planning new projects, staying in touch with her team back in Chicago, and managing Max's care, Samantha's life felt like a puzzle of old dreams and new responsibilities. Even so, as the weeks passed, something started to shift. The triplets grew used to having Ben around, shared dinners, awkward silences, laughter over burnt toast, and late-night talks all wound together to build a new normal. There was a gentle hope taking root in their everyday life, one that felt shaky but real. They were not the same family. Ben and Samantha had once imagined, but maybe, just maybe, they could become something better than before. The next few weeks in Houston passed in a blur of small steps forward. The day of Max's transplant was tense for everyone, but things went as well as anyone could have hoped. Ben and Max were both in recovery rooms that first night, tired but safe, and Samantha sat between them, offering comfort with quiet words and gentle smiles. Gradually, Max's color returned and his strength grew. The kids started bickering again over board games in the hospital lounge, and their laughter, cautious at first, returned just a little louder every day. Ben's own recovery kept him coming back to the hospital for checkups and follow-up treatments. This opened up extra time around his kids, and he finally got to see all the things that made up their world. Lucas, practicing his magic tricks for anyone within earshot, Sophie curled up with a stack of library books, and Max collecting funny hospital stories. These moments were new for Ben, and he cherished them, grateful for the chance to see his children grow up in real time. Meanwhile, Elaine noticed how Ben seemed a little lost in Houston, away from his old business life. Recognizing his talents, she suggested he come on as a consultant for Windy City Kids' newest projects. It started simple, discussions about expanding outreach, drawing up ideas for new programs. But working together gave Ben and Samantha time to interact without old baggage weighing them down. There was no pretending things were easy, but deadlines and goals were far less loaded than family arguments. Their respect for each other grew as the organization flourished with both of them involved. Elaine kept the process running smoothly, helping everyone stay focused. As the days went by, the family's old hurts did not disappear, but living so closely in this new place forced everyone to face them head-on. Sometimes Samantha and Ben would talk late at night about the past. Sometimes they would just share a tired laugh after the kids finally went to sleep, both finding comfort in the company. The children picked up on these small moments, how their parents worked together in the kitchen, the way Ben always remembered to save an extra slice of cake for Samantha, or how they would sometimes exchange glances when Lucas said something funny. Sophie once whispered to Max that maybe their parents would get back together. Max, still weak but hopeful, nodded. The kids began rooting quietly for a happy ending, letting their small gestures, drawing family pictures, insisting on joint outings, nudging chairs closer at dinner, fill the house with a sense of cautious but growing hope. On a mild spring afternoon in Houston, the living room of Samantha's new house buzzed with laughter and the excited chatter of 6-year-olds. Streamers crisscrossed above the furniture and a homemade chocolate cake covered in colorful sprinkles waited on the kitchen counter. Close friends and neighbors had gathered, filling the home with a warmth that offered a sharp contrast to the stress and uncertainty of the last few months. As the triplets, now fully recovered and brimming with energy, opened presents surrounded by their friends, Ben and Samantha moved around the room together, sharing easy smiles and side conversations with guests. Elaine and Mrs. Carter, who had both supported the family through thick and thin, watched the scene with quiet satisfaction. Every so often their eyes met, exchanging proud glances as they took in the picture of this patched-together family. In the backyard, Lucas showed off his latest magic trick to a group of kids, while Max challenged them to a race, his laughter ringing out freely. Sophie stood in the center of it all, leading a make-believe parade and occasionally sneaking glances back at her parents, just to make sure they were watching. The birthday celebration had a relaxed feeling, and everyone seemed aware that it meant more than just another party. In the corner of the yard, after the candles had been blown out and the singing had faded, Samantha and Ben gathered the kids and their friends into a circle for a toast. Samantha, a little nervous, raised her glass of sparkling apple juice and thanked everyone, not just for coming, but for believing in her family's new beginning. Ben followed, his words careful and heartfelt, talking about second chances and how grateful he felt to stand alongside his children after nearly losing the opportunity. There was no attempt to airbrush the past. Apologies were woven into hugs, and the kids' questions sometimes brought up memories that stung. But every moment, whether awkward or joyful, was met honestly. The journey they had shared, including all the wrong turns and fresh starts, was accepted by everyone there as something real and valuable. Even the way Ben looked at Samantha carried something different now, some forgiveness, some hope, and a promise to keep showing up. By the end of the day, with Max giggling on Ben's shoulders and Sophie dozing in Samantha's arms, it was clear that while life was still full of uncertainty, they were stronger as a family. There was no need for fairy tales. Where they stood now was enough, and the fresh chapter they were building together felt more genuine than anything they could have planned. It was only after the guests had gone home and the last plates had been cleared from the kitchen that Samantha noticed the low thrum of the Life Flight helicopter in the distance. From the back porch, where soft party lights still glowed, she could see it landing on the helipad behind the neighborhood hospital, an almost daily sight, now familiar. Not so long ago, that sound had meant something different. Back in Chicago, it meant separation. Samantha handling emergencies on her own, and Ben with a foot always somewhere else, immersed in work miles away. The helicopter hovering over their lives had been a line dividing two worlds that rarely met. Now, watching it through the humid Houston air, the helicopter seemed to say something else. It was still a reminder of all the things they could not control, but it also made her think about the view from above, how distance sometimes helped. A person see the whole map instead of just where their feet stood. Ben joined her outside, the two of them side by side in an easy silence. He followed her gaze and after a moment smiled, not with regret, but with an understanding that came from living through storms together. Inside, the triplets settled, down with a bedtime story, their voices echoing down the hall. Mrs. Carter sent a quick message with photos from the party, and Elaine dropped off flowers as a final gesture of friendship before heading home. Around them, the house was at peace, Not because everything had been solved, but because everyone had decided to start again, together. Samantha realized that the helicopter's distant hum no longer meant loss or running away. It stood for something different now. A kind of emotional altitude, the ability to pull back and see the twists and turns that had brought them here. As the day ended, both she and Ben knew the mistakes of the past would never really vanish. But that was all right. They were done letting those mistakes be dead weight. Instead, they would build on them, learn from every hard conversation, every misstep, and every act of forgiveness that followed. Their future would have bumps, but it was theirs to claim. There was no map to follow, just the hope that by telling the truth and showing up for each other over and over, they could keep moving forward. What mattered was not the smoothness of the path, but the simple courage to keep building side by side, one honest day at a time.